Education to order. First up is the meeting properly posted?
Yes, it was.
Excellent, thank you very much, sir. Next up is opportunity for public comment. Is there anybody, we didn't get any sheets, is anybody interested in speaking and addressing the committee? Alrighty, moving on to action items. First action item is approval of minutes from November 8th, 2021. Looking for a motion.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Reinschak. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Como. Are there any discussion about the minutes? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 4-0. Next up is the approval of the vouchers. Any questions?
Nope, no
No
questions.
questions. All righty. Be looking for a motion to approve the vouchers as presented.
So moved.
Thank you. Mr. Dietz, is there a second? I'll second. Oh, you? Got you, Mr. Como?
You can.
Okay, I'll second. Any discussion on the vouchers? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 4-0. All righty. Next up, our discussion information items. First up is the fundraising discussion.
Yeah, Kyle Lemieux is here.
Lemieux is here.
And
Haven't seen him in a long time.
we might see Brian Schley as well.
Yeah, hopefully Brian gets a chance to pop in. We did.
Probably on board meeting.
We did tell Dan Schreier that he has the night off because we care about him doing well. And
Yeah.
been going through a lot lately, and so I hope he's somewhere relaxing right now.
Yeah. So we're here just as a follow-up to our October, thank you. I was trying to, October meeting where we started talking about district fundraising and some follow-up information for you to consider. So I'll turn it over to Kyle to walk you through a slide deck we have.
Thank you.
There we go.
Well, good evening. Thank you once again for your time. Just a little bit of a slide deck to follow up on our visit from October about this greater idea of athletic facility improvement here in Waukesha. So just a quick review of our process. As athletic directors, we late in the summer kind of brought some of these notions to upper administration to say, hey, what would these conversations begin to look like? And from there, we put enough pieces together to come before you in October. From there, we started to frame out the ideas of what we would call our guiding principles of this work and what kind of set our path in motion to the point where we want to update you tonight with where we're at. Certainly a fluid process, nothing definitive yet, and as always open to your feedback. So to go on the idea of these guiding principles, so as you look at this giant task of figuring out in a school district our size, where to begin, what to prioritize, how to balance among multiple schools. We set these 5 as we looked at other area examples as the priority. And so when looking at the most actionable items in our district, ideas such as safety, so this isn't necessarily just tune-ups, this is where we can do better, we should do better types of scenarios. Legality, compliance, equity issues when it comes to Title IX and just the broader perspective of serving all programs. The functionality of a space, and so when it was designed 20, 30, 50 years ago, it had a certain plan and a certain concept in mind, and maybe we've moved past that, and so we need to consider that as we go forward. Shared advantages, and so certainly there are times when individual programs or certain sports or groups in this case have a need that should be met. That being said, we truly want to be efficient and maximize what we invest into in a way that if we can put our eggs in a basket of objectives that satisfy 10, 12, 15 programs and more, that's going to earn more of our priority in many cases, coupled with the idea of spaces that can serve curricular needs. And then finally on that list is the idea of instilling pride within our schools and the idea of these showpieces or these ideas that we can be proud of. And so we look at South's Pool as one example, being one of the best facilities in the state, and we get to claim that as Waukesha's own, right? But the curb appeal that, again, not only is going to sustain what we believe are our current enrollment, but hopefully attract new students along the way to be part of what we're excited with here in Waukesha. So those are the guiding principles. So based off that, we've set into a few different next steps, and I'm going to summarize each of these as we go through, but some of the next steps include a facility inventory, exploring the funding options available, the idea of reviewing our 5-year capital improvement plan as a district, understanding the differentiation between maintenance versus improvement, aligning with board policies that currently exist and considering what may need to change in the future, and then ultimately refining our process so that the project selection is transparent and appropriate across the board, especially in a district our size. So the first task, as I mentioned, the facility improvement grid. So this is an idea of basically trying to capture all of the information from surrounding schools about who's done what, right? Where has it gone well? What might they have done differently? And where could we learn from going forward? So we have been busy visiting area schools, like driving around on campuses. I need a picture of this, I need a picture of that. I'm going to call this athletic director, I'm going to talk to this community member, and just gathering some of that feedback, whether it's formal and informal, to get to a point of understanding of how have other districts gone about this work, and where have they seen wins and maybe areas of growth. Through that, we are then internally attempting to really gauge where are our areas of strength and where are our own areas of need, and then ultimately figuring out some next steps. So in that slide is just a few examples of Mukwonago and their recent work in their new gym, Muskego and their complete overhaul of their outdoor area with bleachers, turf, track, concessions, bathrooms, you name it. There's some other areas there that aren't pictured. And then that top right is Elkhorn and their indoor facility that they have added for their community. So just a few examples of what we've started to look at. It is important to note, Waukesha has some recent wins. And so what we definitely want to be clear about is that this is not the woe is us mantra, that we have done some things well in Waukesha, and we want to be proud of that. So as I mentioned, South's pool we feel like is a showpiece. The ability to put in those 3 turf fields across the district, and especially in the timing that we did, was terrific. And then the field houses in almost $1 million in wood floors when we put those in now 8 years ago, continue to be great resources for our communities and for our district. So we definitely have things to be proud of. That being said, we do also have pressing areas of need. And so what you see up there include pictures of South's outdoor bleachers and the way they look right now. They are in need of replacement. On the bottom left, you see the west side of North High School and currently what they use as a softball facility. And so they are looking to definitely make improvements there. And then the lower right is the current state of Waukesha West's track. It has been at least 12 years, potentially more, that even a fresh coat has gone on to the top of that surface that's highly used, very public and visible, and so on. So we have areas to be proud of, but we definitely have areas that we're recognizing as need. And so after we've kind of gathered this information in our own facility inventories, we begin to explore the ideas of these funding options. And so just as we're going out and taking those pictures and having those conversations, we're also trying to understand on a deeper level, how did you go about these conversations internally? What did it look like to involve key stakeholders, and what strategies did you use to raise this significant amount of funds as you went? The other idea of exploring the funding options is certainly for us as a group to figure out what we are comfortable with. What does it look like for the school district of Waukesha, both with its business office, school board, and beyond? What's our comfort level and our scope? Certainly we want to gather information from our own community members, and I feel like I'm often the unsolicited recipient of that, which is for the most part a very good thing, but we want to maybe formalize that process as we go forward. And then finally, learning from surrounding districts so that we can customize what to do here in Waukesha. So this is just a simple example of a few of the communities that I've spoken with. So as I showed you from the one picture, Mukwonago recently went through a large-scale referendum, and it changed the landscape of their entire campus. The gym was one aspect of that improvement, but it is a brand new school for all intents and purposes. And so they, if you looked at all of these examples, they use multiple avenues to raise these funds, but this was essentially the primary lever that they pulled in some of their improvements. If you looked at Muskego, they went and had the great fortune of having private donors come forward and say, we would like to assist you in these endeavors, so where can we give, what can we give, and so on. So they've been fortunate in that regard. From a sponsorship standpoint or a naming rights standpoint, Hartford has just recently launched a campaign where it's their Onward Oriole, and they have a piece that I'll put out in the next slide that kind of details how to take advantage of location by location and partnering with the district. And then finally, Oconomowoc, while they've used many different funding mechanisms through their improvements in recent years, one of the avenues they did take is to simply budget for it as a district, use appropriate fund balance, and move forward with that to say, this is where we're going to spend down because we think this is an appropriate expense. So I have SDW smack in the middle. And that is because it would be our general belief that in a district our size, and to accomplish some of the things we would hope to, only pulling on one of those levers probably does not cross the finish line. And so what we really will need to do is to take a close consideration of all of those routes and figure out maybe even which fit best for various projects along the way. This is the Hartford example I was talking about, so just a quick summary of maybe what is otherwise kind of a complicated grid. They have various locations listed. They've set price points on those locations. And then what you see going to the right is what they are willing to sell or to make available to these donors or businesses because of the contribution to that space. So it could mean industry exclusivity, programs, announcements, all the way down to presence on their website. So they've decided ahead of time, this is what we are comfortable with, this is how we'd like to move forward. And the two lines that you see crossed out on the top, those are actually two that they have already sold off, and they got to announce that at their first football game while we happened to be guests that night. And so I made sure, of course, to go over and grab a brochure and see what in the world they were doing to have $700,000 come their way. But we'd like to take the good ideas and customize them into Waukesha fashion. So it's just one example of something that hasn't necessarily been done extensively in Waukesha before that we're trying to have more conversation around. The other piece, the 5-year capital improvement plan that Darren and Kyle McCarthy certainly work in leading. Athletic directors will continue to serve as an advisory role, and really the big idea would be to be efficient in our work. And it is understandable that, and really admirable, the work that Darren and Kyle do when tasked with caring for 20+ facilities and taking care of all of the needs just to have students in and out the door every day. So when we add to that list in any fashion, we understand that there's potential challenges there. But being able to put us in a position where we have some efficiencies and alignment, and we're not kind of doing things twice or getting caught going back on something later on. And then finally, just having a clear definition of maintenance versus improvement. And so when we have something in place that needs to get better just because it's our facility and we should care for it, that's a very different conversation than, hey, we're looking down the road and this seems like a great idea as a someday project. I think there's a differentiation not only in how to prioritize that, but how those types of projects are funded in the end as well. As I mentioned from the start, the board policy alignment is important, and so there are many that overlap or relate, but these are the 4 that probably come up most directly or most often as we've been kind of working through. And I think this kind of goes 2 ways, as I explained. So on one hand, we of course want to do a great job of staying within current board policy and following what has been set before us. At the same time, we've already started to see through various conversations that it may be worth a look at other districts and some of the language they have used or the approach they have taken, and potentially to the extent of policy revision if collectively we felt like that was appropriate. So all that to say, we are cognizant of that, and at the same time, keeping in mind the conversations that could be had down the road. So ultimately, as you put all those pieces together and we look to move, what we would like to put in place is a committee process that is headed by the high school athletic directors in conjunction with the facility directors, certainly with support of high school principals and district administration. And we're studying the large-scale requests and needs across the district, all 3 sites, in a way that then we would develop a strategic plan, not only from how we fundraise for these, but also the scope of the projects and the sequence of those projects. And so what's on that slide is just a snapshot of the top of the sheet, if you will. And so if you followed it, you'd see there's not only a site-based rank, but there's an overall rank. And so yes, that does mean that a certain project at one school comes before another school, but by being so on this sheet, what that indicates is we have collectively agreed that that's what's best for our district overall. And so it's not necessarily just, a single vote process. This will end up being a one-stop shop when it comes to the renderings that we receive, the financial quotes that we have, the notes that we take of our learnings, And then ultimately, what you see on the far right is a check back to those guiding principles. And so certainly as we go down the list, there will be projects that do not necessarily cross off all 5 guiding principles. There might be a need where we'd say, this is so important functionally within our building, we should get this done. And so there will come a time for that. But you can understandably see at the top of our list that the important projects have all 5 check marks crossed off. So that's what we're looking for as we begin this work. And as you can see there, sooner or later, you got to put rubber to the road. And so we're saying on that list that we believe track resurfacing at 2 of the schools and fence and stadium renovation pieces at North especially end up being what rises to the top of our list. Just as an example, as we've been going through this committee process so far. So just finally, before next time, and hopefully next time is sooner rather than later, just a few of our goals that we're working through. We're going to continue to try and complete the work that I detail with the facility inventory, establishing some of those funding recommendations and the policy review, as well as setting a more robust sequence of projects that we would have throughout the district. We'd also like to determine what we could see as quick wins to establish and move on before August of 2022. And the reason I would put that on there is I have learned in my time in this position that fundraising is all about cycles of momentum. And there are different times a year where it's really advantageous to push forward some of this work and other times where it's just not. Going into that late summer and then the start of a new school year is often one of the most successful cycles of a year. And so for us to be able to potentially get out in front of our community and say, look at the wins we already have that we've accomplished by August. Now, are you willing to partner with us in different ways and take advantage of that fall fundraising cycle? We would feel pretty motivated and encouraged that we could see some success there. And then finally, certainly as our goals, we want to continue to listen, take into account any questions and suggestions, whether it's from this board, upper administration, and so on, as we formalize the long-range plan. So that is the end of our slides, but we'd be happy to take questions.
Any questions?
Yeah, I have a really specific question. If we could go back to the Hartford slide on sponsorships, I'd appreciate that.
Let's see if it allows me quickly here.
Yeah, so when you take a look at the dollar amounts, are those one-time donations that last for a certain period of time? 5 years, 10 years? I don't know if you know that or not.
I don't know that for sure. I have seen it done both ways. So I'm aware of some examples where, yes, it's been gifted up front, and that's what allows them to move on that project. I'm also aware of other examples, such as down the road in Mukwonago, where they've made arrangements with the district, so an outside group made arrangements with the district, FOMA, they're Friends of Mukwonago Athletics, where they have raised that money back over a period of time, even though they initially completed the project.
Sure, and do you see for the sponsorships too, a period of time for the naming rights? So it's a maximum of 10 years or whatever that is.
Absolutely, and whether that's 10 or 15 or wherever our comfort level stood, that's how others have presented it in the same way. And so they would have the ability of first right of refusal is what we've all typically seen in other scenarios too, when they get to the end of that term,
Sure.
if there were a renewal process.
Sure. And I do appreciate your presentation, in particular, the various ways of raising monies. You are right, I think, that there is not going to be just one of those pillars, or one of those ways of raising the money. And that's where the planning comes in, is how do we take advantages of each of these ways? And I liked your approach of that's really what you're going to be coming to us in the future, as you have a plan put together saying these might be the best way to go about funding these projects. So I'm encouraged by the thought that you and your team have put in between the last time we met and now. I don't see, at least from my perspective, I don't see any flags at this time that are going up for me. I do think that we have probably a pretty big list. I haven't seen the entire list. There's a lot of projects, and I do appreciate the differentiation, and we'll need to be very specific in differentiating maintenance from improvements, and be very clear about that as we talk about it amongst ourselves and our community. But I think this is, from my perspective right now, I don't see any caution flags, at least from my point of view at this time.
Okay. So the track resurfacing, is that maintenance or is that
Maintenance versus improvement,
Yeah.
I would tend to put that in maintenance.
maintenance? Okay.
So, as I mentioned, as an example, that maintenance work hasn't been done for some time,
Right.
so unfortunately, it's gotten to that extent. Whereas I would put a track improvement in the idea of, if we decided, we don't need the $100,000 resurfacing, we need the $750,000 brand-new track,
Right.
underlayer and so on. So,
Yeah, okay.
they both are definitely available, but that's where it just comes to us figuring out where is it appropriate to maintain versus buy new.
So I'm looking at the projects, the southwest and north, and you mentioned in the south one, intended to serve as a 5-year fix before a large-scale project coincides with the turf repairs. What would the large-scale project be? Would it be, because turf repairs aren't necessarily large-scale unless you're actually,
Yeah, so.
I mean, I was
refers-
just wondering what that, does that mean? Because the track doesn't
Sure.
go around the turf field, right?
That refers to ultimately the replacement of the current
Okay.
turf surfaces. So
Okay.
when we hit into that 15 or so year range.
okay.
We know that there's going to be a little bit of maintenance on our base layer
Right.
and then new carpet placed
Yep.
on our surfaces.
Okay.
So a track improvement would likely include needing to have some construction steps that go past the width of the normal track.
Okay.
In a way where you'd need to actually disconnect the turf. So we didn't want to create two problems with one.
Okay.
So we would leave intact, maintain what we could until we got to that point.
Right, but the question I have about south is the track doesn't go around a football field, it goes around a practice field.
You are correct.
So are you talking about going turf on the practice field too then, or what would that?
No, and to be honest with you, that's probably a copy and paste in that set.
Oh, okay, okay. I just was
between both
wondering
projects, yep.
if it
When
would-
we were
if-
quoted for those projects, we were quoted with West and South having the work done together.
Okay.
So that's probably why
Gotcha.
that's there. But
Okay.
yes, you are correct. That is around a practice field.
Okay.
And not to speak for Dan, but that being said, yeah, the purpose and use of their track is a little different than
Yeah,
our track.
than West track, okay, all right. I
And
just
and
wanted-
I apologize for being a little bit late. Thanks, Kyle, for leading through that.
Yeah.
I think just what we provided as a visual is really just to kind of lay out what it could look like versus really diving into every single project. We didn't want to go put the cart before the horse. We just wanted kind of a visual of what something could look like, and we'll obviously fine tune some of that as we get going, but didn't want to get too far ahead before we. if
We
the-
thought that was the whole list.
Yeah. Exactly.
There's only about 30 more. Yeah.
When you let us loose, that'll probably be
Yeah.
quite a document, but really want, and I think Kyle probably laid this out really nicely, just want to make sure that we are coming along with everyone on this and everyone feels comfortable about us looking at things this way and even down to the guiding principles, if those align with what we all as a group feel comfortable with, so.
So, have you, speaking of north, does that have some familiarity with the tennis courts as north, as you know? Have we talked to the city about those?
We have, Darren actually sat in on a meeting, was that in September? Or October, early October.
Somewhere in that range.
So during the season, we shared our concerns from a safety standpoint
Mhm.
with Park and Rec.
Right.
We had 1 or 2 injuries actually during our tennis season, and so we sent pictures in and just sent our concerns. And Park and Rec did come out and do some asphalt patching,
Okay.
not complete yet, hoping they'll do some more in the spring. And I think they are uncommitted or undecided on the future of the Lowell tennis courts.
Okay.
I think they put out there that they wouldn't mind us putting tennis courts on our own site and them getting rid of theirs, but that wasn't really a feasible option to just say, we'll just do this. So it's a work in progress.
Okay.
But they did acknowledge and
They-
respond
yeah,
to
I mean,
concerns and-
I have swept them.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
lot to sweep.
There's a lot to sweep.
Yeah,
You got to get there.
yeah,
About an hour and a half before the matches start
yeah.
to sweep the courts. Okay. All righty. Mr. Dietz, did you have something?
When it says up there that the stadium at North is currently not secure, that seems like a safety issue to me. Is that what it is?
There are gaps in the fencing that middle schoolers can easily wiggle through, and high schoolers too. I mean, from the standpoint of like our entire student body during the school day, it's more of I would feel like a liability issue of, we have kids that will climb whatever fence we have in the district,
Sure.
no matter, unless we put barbed wire on it, and I don't think we would want that look or that
Right.
feel, but the gaps are pretty wide, and and we've always, and this stems back in the last 10 years, we've never really taken an approach of, people running out and chasing people off of our fields and things like that. We've tried to be pretty friendly to the community as long as they're cleaning up after each other and not damaging things, but I think just, even on like a football night, we have kids climbing in and out of areas, and kids that we send out to say you weren't behaving appropriately are going through the side fence gap to come back in and then running into the crowd, and so just some areas I think we can at least tighten up, and if we were to do that whole project, I think that would be the time to really secure everything the way we would want to.
Good.
I actually have a meeting I want to say it's next week with Principal Higgins at North to go over some of these things there at least, a little laundry list of items. But this is a big item. I mean, we've talked about just in bleachers alone, inside and outside. It could be millions of dollars
Right.
very easily, but not that you have to do them all at once, but I think overall the ADs have put together a nice plan and really taken on the challenge of having 3 high schools in one city is also, McGuanago, it was one high school, and it's a lot easier to get
Yep.
things done.
Right.
So I think we're all on the same page in terms of, having that balanced approach to the improvements that we'd be looking to do.
So what's the scope on the north? It says, stadium improvements. Is it just the fencing, or what else are you guys looking at? What else is in the bid, I guess, because you put it out for bid, right?
Well, I knew that we had Darren and Kristen meeting, and they have not gotten to the bid process.
Oh,
yet,
okay.
But it's an
Alrighty.
example project that's pending on the cost estimate.
Okay.
We have several options of starting with what's most visual to the public
Yep.
and kind of on the outside to, it would really be nice at some point to do the interior. So I think there's probably a tiered approach to that.
Okay.
In terms of our stadium, I think a point of pride for us is we have a great stadium for hosting track meets.
Yep.
And our North Star invite is very well known in the area, and we host 35 teams, boys and girls, on a regular basis for that. But I think starting from the outside, and then there are some areas where either some maintenance or down the road, I think our press box is not too far
Okay.
out from needing some attention. There's some rot on it in some areas where either things
Right.
parts of it will need to be replaced, or who knows.
Okay.
So, but
And
those
what
would
is-
be the main.
What does the track look like at North?
Fantastic.
Fantastic, okay.
Yeah, we are in great shape. We do have one area of concern with flooding. We had a drainage issue, which when we replaced the track, which was I want to say 7 years ago, 7 or 8 years ago, we did it right after the turf was done.
Okay.
And they put in a new drain system, but it plugs.
Yeah.
And then it floods, and we'll have 2 to 3 feet of water in that section. We're just worried about it washing out.
Right, okay.
But at the time, we invested in some covers where the football and soccer teams go in and out over the track.
Yep.
And actually, even the company that installed it came out and resealed it for free and repainted it.
Oh, okay.
2 or 3 years ago, because of the drainage issues was partly due to needing higher quality sealant, so. So it's, our track is
Okay.
very nice.
Okay,
Yeah.
excellent. Mr. Como?
So when do you think the first list in this format will be prepared? And you said you wanted to have some quick strike potentials to get going in August. And I'm assuming it's going to be maybe a living document, at least for a while.
Absolutely. When you say list, do you mean a more complete list?
Yeah, so
of
this
where
is
we're
a
headed?
sample, right? This is a sample that Brian was saying. This is kind of just to give you an idea of what it would kind of look like. And I like how this is organized. I like, the columns that you have in there. I know you've given thought to all the rows, but there still needs to be some discussion on all those rows, is what I'm assuming. And that's going to happen amongst the ADs and administration, is what I'm assuming. So what do you think the timeline might be for us to take a peek at more than the 3 that you had up here? And again, this is just an example.
Yeah, I think it could take place within a couple of months. I think the biggest hurdle, if you will be to have enough complete information to adequately discuss. And so some of the bidding processes and some of the larger scale things, there are some districts who have gone the route of, instead of piecemealing this and asking for individual bids, they've gone with a firm or a vendor or, a company that does some of this work for them and creates a master plan and then bids that out, in sum. So I guess that's some internal discussion we'll have to have as well to figure out how do we see this being the best approach for Waukesha.
Sure.
But so from the beginning, we certainly, we joke, but we have our wish lists. They have a lot of zeros in them, but with good reason. And so we could have that list, I think, available in the not so distant future. But one of the challenges would be the numbers.
I do think it's important to have the conversations ahead of time. I would prefer that you vet that out quite well
Yes.
at the AD and administration level and figure out whether we're going to bring consultants in or not, maybe even some that we've used recently in our referendum work, which I thought our vendors and consultants did just a spectacular job with the referendum monies that we made available to them. I just really think the improvements are fantastic. So I have, at least there's a high level of trust with those vendors. But I would much prefer to have you flesh that out really well before you come back here. Now, if you have, let's say, as you're going through that process, and you need some committee input or whatever, that's fine. I don't mean to say you have to come back with everything finished for us. It doesn't need to be a finished product, but there was, I think, a lot of thought that went in from the last time we met, where it was just kind of this idea, to now, and I really like what I'm seeing here.
I think one of the
agree.
areas we might need a little bit of help with the group is, as Kyle kind of presented near the end, that we probably will fall somewhere in our own, not exactly like Hartford, not exactly like one of the other schools. And just, as some of these projects come together, they will fall more into the category of like needing community support. And sometimes it's helpful to have, like, what are the options, or how are we allowing, what would a sponsorship look like? Does it fall within our board policies? And having that lined up so that when we go to company X, Y, or Z and say, we'd love you to, put naming rights on this, it really should be something where if they say yes, and we're like, great, we have it all lined up. And so I think we'll probably work simultaneously to build the sponsorship opportunities, maybe bring that in for some feedback, and then work on this list and bring that at a later point too.
Because I do think another aspect of the creation of this list is that we can create an initial order, but if we are fortunate enough to have a private donor, a business come in and say, hey, I really care about item number 6, well, if they're able to help us bring that to fruition, item number 6 could become item number 1.
Right.
And so this is a living, breathing document that we want to be, attuned to where we can see the path of least resistance.
Mr. Coleman.
And just, Dr. Cook, as our primary person on policy, and from an administrative perspective, I would assume that you and Mr. Baumgart would take a peek at things and agendize, items as appropriate?
Yeah, as suggestions came forward, we certainly would bring that to the committee and bring the updates to the board as they were needed.
Okay. And we've been through a number of things like naming. We naming of fields. We went through a round there a number of years ago. Naming of rooms. We've been through some of those things, but I don't think we've really been through sponsorship in as deep of a manner as what we probably might need for this.
I'm not aware of any agreements that we've had for a sponsorship arrangement.
Yeah, our policy is pretty restrictive when it comes down to sponsorship and naming rights and things like that. So, as we went down this road, if that was something that the board or the committee wanted to do, we would definitely have to take a look at the language.
Yeah.
I'd have to say of all the conversations like this is one, the whole sponsorship area, within the same district, within 5 years, I've had them love it, and 5 years later, they don't want any signs anywhere, and it can come and go. But we would make sure we're in alignment with what the current board has in mind.
Yeah, and there are some communities, obviously, that have had substantial, you think of Sheboygan with Acuity and the amount of money that they've donated for field houses and things like that, We would definitely have to look at that if there was a corporate sponsor that the board was interested in partnering with.
And it was kind of that line of thought that led us here to begin with, is to see where the board was, because we really haven't done like a Hartford approach to things, just to see if there was an appetite for it or not, and to tie into, I think our belief statements are fantastic in outlining what our approach is, so any reinforcement we get, I think, is more motivation for us to finish this project up and get moving on something in the near short term, so.
Yeah, and just part of the framework of our conversations that we would like to have next, with your permission, would be along some of these sponsorship ideas that would then inform us of potential changes we would suggest to the policy. And so if we see opportunities in the community to have a 5-year partnership with a business that would have much more significant dollars than we've dealt with in the past, well, that's something new and different that we'd want to bring before you. We would not be comfortable, though, entering into that conversation unless there was at least some willingness to see that forward. So we didn't want to overstep.
For sure. Okay. Any other questions? No?
Nice job.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Great presentation.
Appreciate it.
All righty. Next on the discussion information items is Appendix 20, Hazard and Threat Specific Procedures.
So 7 or 8 years ago, we came forward with our crisis response manual. The board approved that. It's got to be almost 7 years ago to the month. And as a result of that approval and the process that we used, we agreed to come back administratively to what was the safety committee at the time, and provide any updates or share recent discussions that we've had to the crisis response manual. Going back, actually it started in COVID when we were shut down, and then going into last school year, we began the discussions after we debriefed the South incident that happened approximately 2 years ago as well, on areas that we needed to make some adjustments, make some improvements. We had that lived example in our system. And so what we put in front of you tonight, and I apologize that the presentation is short, the past couple of weeks have been busy dealing with other things. We put the areas, an updated document that we are going to operationalize after the winter break going into second semester with our administrators that has some modifications to a few areas. And I'll just briefly scroll through those and answer any questions. We didn't touch anything around abduction or missing students. We did update a few things around active shooter, particularly around the area of recovery, and how we would go from a lockdown to a lockout procedure to a hold, and then what we would do for those individuals who were the first responders or those on scene when that event happened. We learned some lessons in that. As you scroll down, bomb threat suspicious packages, if you scroll a couple pages down, you'll see the checklist that we have. We're providing that to our administrative assistants. Should a threat come in over the phone. It's not traditionally been what we've experiencing lately, but it's not to say that it couldn't happen. We're usually seeing these things come through social media or email. And then the final area that we had some recommended updates on was around, if you give me 1 second here, the intruder hostage situation. And then our informing of the superintendent and the law enforcement, and then trying to maintain a visual on the person while also maintaining the safety of our staff member who is in that position. So those were the areas that we made some adjustments to. Generally, we don't try to get too specific with this, but just wanted to give you an idea that we are working with it. I'd like to thank Steve Fisher, the assistant principal at South High School, and Josh Tyndall, the SRO over there. They led the charge in debriefing and coming up with some ideas. We did meet with all of the SROs and administration at the secondary level to review this before we made any adjustments.
Excellent. Are there any questions? Member Dagno. Ms. Coleman.
Just as part of the process, the SROs work for the police departments.
Correct.
Employees of the police department. Do you know if, like the captain gets to review our plan, captain of the police? I know we
I
have.
reviewed that with the lieutenant on the police department.
Lieutenant,
Annual, yeah,
That's Dan.
the lieutenant, not Dan, Lieutenant Ty Hoffman, he oversees he oversees the school resource officer program among many other areas there. And we work most closely on school safety, so.
So they do, you have interaction with them on a regular basis, so
Yep.
right? I mean, it's like you got the bat phone.
We're in regular contact.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Do we also have the fire chief or someone from the fire department review this too, or?
Where appropriate, yes.
Okay. And the county, do we get the county involved at all?
We will work with the sheriff's department as it pertains to Rose Glen. All of the Waukesha Police, Waukesha Fire, and Waukesha County Sheriff's Department has access to our plans and to our buildings 24/7.
Okay.
So they're all on the same page with what we do.
Is there any need to be in contact at the state level at all?
We do have to provide the state updates annually as part of the safety grants and Act, I forget the Act number right now, 143, I think, where we were awarded all of that money a few years ago. We do have safety responsibilities with them as well.
And anything at the federal level?
Nothing at the federal level.
Okay. Appreciate all your hard work.
No problem.
Any other questions? No? Who covers Rose Glen on fire? Is that the village?
I believe so.
The city
But
doesn't?
yeah, we have not worked as closely with, the departments that we've worked closely with are Waukesha Police, Waukesha Fire, and the Sheriff's Department.
Okay.
I couldn't speak exactly who covers Rose Glen for fire.
Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you very much.
No problem.
All right. Next up is the monthly budget report.
Okay, so things are all on track. I'll start with that. We're in good position this time of year. Our local sources, our largest was our building rentals this past month. Right about now, we start to see decline in our student fees and things like that until closer to the end of the year when they kick back up again. So right now, building rentals, we had $40,000, close to $40,000 in building rentals last month. Interdistrict sources, really the only thing we ever receive in that this time of year is e-Achieve. We are starting to get the first semester tuition coming in from our billing. Intermediate, intermediate sources, nothing in November. State sources, we have a payment, received our first AGR, which is the Achievement Gap Reduction, with formerly the SAGE grant. We received our first payment this year, which was $79,244. Big payment in our main payment in federal sources. We had Medicaid, Title I, Title IV, and CEIS totaling $169,000 in federal sources. Other revenue, mainly we had a U.S. bank rebate of $21,000. And then there was $6,000, a little over $6,000 restitution for miscellaneous for things like restitution and contract liquidation fees, other smaller miscellaneous fees. So we collected 6.64% of our budgeted revenues compared to 5.96% last year, so right around the same collection rate. Moving on to expenses, salaries and benefits. The November payrolls were all run, and I do every month when we run our payrolls, I have a salary projection document and I enter in our actuals and make sure that we're still on target, and we're absolutely on target to be within our budget for both salaries and benefits. Sorry, got a really bad frog in my throat tonight. Purchase services. Main spending were under personal services, utilities, pupil transportation, and tuition. We're at 24.51% of our budget, a little higher than we were last year, but that's when, depending on when you have some services and timing of payments, it's going to be a little different, so nothing to be alarmed of there. Non-capital objects, we spent $310,000 in non-capital objects, and the largest being equipment, and that included a little over $38,000 for Achieve PCs and a little over $67,000 for Banting playground equipment. But part of that is being reimbursed by their PTO, so they've got, their PTO is also contributing to that. And then a little over $15,000 for Hillcrest Library furniture, and then a lot of smaller miscellaneous items. Capital objects, the main spend that month was technology related, which was a payment to Heartland Business Systems for our support for our core and wireless technologies. Insurance and adjustments, there was $84,000 payments for expenses due to the south pool damage. Transfers, no transfers this month. Other objects, minimal spendings, just our annual membership renewals and a payment, the larger payment for rescinded taxes that comes this time of year. Overall, we're at 25.44% of our approved budgets, and compares last year to 24.69, so nothing out of the ordinary. Pretty much same report for Fund 27. Our first categorical aid payment came in November of $1.1 million. Expenditures, same thing with salaries and benefits. We're on track where we expect to be. Pupil transportation and tuition, as always, are our main purchase services in special education. Supplies for non-capital objects are really the only thing that we have in special education. Capital objects, nope, no capital purchases for November, no insurance, and no transfers under special education. We are going to start doing, usually at the end of the year, we have to do a large transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 27. We're going to start doing that on a monthly basis just to kind of show the progress throughout the year. So you will start to see that next month, so don't be alarmed. It's just a little change in how we do things. We're going to do things. Fund 43, we are winding down with the money available in that project. We spent $493,638 in November, and we have, oh gosh, I can't remember, was it $120,000 left? A very small amount of money left in our referendum funding of about $120,000, I believe. I'd have to double check that, but we have done a good job of wrapping up projects and getting those expenditures in. As far as the attachments go, the tax levy is the same as last month because nothing changes now until January when we start to get our first payments in. For the claims, we have the dental and the health claims, and both of them are still carrying a very healthy balance to them. And we started to see a little uptick in the health claims, and now it's leveling back down again. So we still have a substantial balance there. And dental too. Dental's holding its own really well. Any questions?
Mr. Como?
I have one, with respect to the damages done this summer to the South Pool. Or was it early fall, whenever it happened?
I'm going to turn that over to
The to-
Darren or Jess.
Late-
Flood, June 7th,
Yeah,
couple days
so,
before school was out.
Hope to be back up and running by the first day of school, that's.
Yeah.
yeah, so what was the total cost of that and how much of that was covered by our insurance?
I'm gonna guess,
You give me 1 second, I can look it up.
yeah, the deductible's $50,000.
Right.
I wanna say it was around $900,000, but I probably shouldn't have said, but.
I don't think it was that high.
And that work is very near completion. There's some supply chain issues on some of the equipment, but none of the major equipment.
Well, it had to have been good enough shape to host the state championship.
Yeah, that was a major date on the calendar that
It was.
Yes.
we were shooting for, so.
Total loss was about 800,000.
And do we know how much was covered by, or was that just the amount that was not covered? Was that the total amount?
No, that was the total amount that we've submitted, or we estimated the
Okay.
cost.
Okay, and how much was covered, do you know how much was covered by our insurance, or are we still working on that, or?
I think everything except the deductible.
Okay, okay,
I haven't had any pushback.
excellent. Excellent, that's good news.
Does our insurance policy cover loss of rental?
Yes, we already received our check.
Awesome.
When things are sitting in literally feet of water, the insurance company tends to,
Yeah, right, no,
Yeah.
for sure.
not a lot of questions, but.
No, usually not.
And just so you know, we have put in an alarm system in that area now to hopefully never run into this again.
A water alarm system, so if it detects leaks, I guess, or at least a certain amount of water
Yep.
accumulating?
Exactly.
Okay,
And we're also identifying other similar areas in the district,
Mm-hmm.
mainly by pools, to get those alarm system in there as well. You can't have them everywhere, but your main HVAC systems, et cetera, need to be protected, so.
How many gallons of water it was?
Oh, Jess, do you remember?
I don't, but the water bill was very high.
I was gonna say, does our insurance cover the water bill?
No,
Yeah,
that was the one thing that was
Okay.
not covered.
Yeah.
And did the water company alert us, or did we, because they know if there's a high usage of water.
No, we
I think-
discovered it.
Part of
Okay,
the
we
problem
did.
was that it happened on a Sunday night.
Oh, okay, I gotcha.
So it was a
'Cause
Sunday.
they're pretty quick about, when they're watching
I
their
think,
meters spin.
if I remember it correctly, it started like at 11 o'clock on a Sunday or Saturday, and I can't remember
Okay.
which night. And then we found it at like 5 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
So. And it was the water heater, like a 4-inch pipe just fell out of the bottom of the water heater, so the volume
Oh, okay,
was
Yeah.
substantial, obviously,
yeah,
if you're familiar with the space.
yeah. Okay,
We filled the lower basement and then up,
and then up, yeah,
so.
second.
Looks like our water bill was about $12,000 higher this year, at this time of year. So I don't know that we can attribute that to all of it. If it was in June, if some of it might have been into last fiscal year, but
Yeah, we actually got the number, I can't remember. But it was
It was quite a bit.
big enough number, you really can't even picture
Yeah.
how much water it is.
How much water it is, right? Okay, all right, any other questions? Okay. All righty. Does that conclude your report, Sherry?
yes, it does.
Fantastic, thanks. All righty, next up is the 2022-2023 budget planning.
Yeah, just a quick update. We've been, we're ahead of schedule on purpose because we knew the financial situation for next school year might be a little more complex, and it's turning out to be. So I just wanted to touch on two items. The first one being our anticipated revenue limit authority for next year, and I'm going to try to share my screen here. So we've been working with the Baird model, and this is the time of year we work on it because we have to get our budget in, which you don't finalize until the last few days of October. So November is the month to work through this. So what you have here is one of the summary pages from the Baird model, and it provides 1 year of historical data. So in 2020, 2021, our revenue limit authority for all exemptions, everything, was $130 million. Our current year revenue limit authority is $129.4 million, so we lost about $600,000 in revenue limit authority. One thing I'd ask you to keep in mind is this second to the bottom line, the private school voucher program. Though if you just look at the total revenue limit authority, it looks like we only lost $600,000. The fact that the voucher system went up about $900,000, there's an expense that comes along with that dollar for dollar. So it's looking like, oh, you're doing all right, you have flat revenue. But we actually lost in terms of dollars that we could spend on district operations, district kids, district facilities, whatever. Actually went down by about $1.5 million. During one of our workshops, I talked about the net revenue limit.
Mm-hmm.
You take out the voucher, you take out anything that comes with a built-in expenditure with it. And the declines are already occurring. And this all goes back to, and I know I talk about it all the time, but it's really important, is our resident enrollment. So for budget year 22-23, we're projecting a continuation of a loss of resident enrollment about, I think it's 1.16%, which is about 120 kids. And we've been declining for 8 or 9 years, I forget the exact number. But there's no increase in the revenue limit authority per pupil in the state biennial budget, and 22-23 will be the second year of the biennial budget. So we know that number's true, so I can tell you with a pretty high level of certainty that we're going to get $10,207 next year per pupil, but we have fewer kids. The 3-year rolling average will go from 11,720 kids down to, based on our projection, 11,515 kids. And you just continue that downward slide of enrollment, and it starts to, obviously impact our ability to generate revenue. But what's unique about this is you add in 2 years in a row where we lost about 300 kids per year. And COVID's in the middle of all that mix, so I'm not going to say those kids don't exist somewhere, but they weren't in our counts. They weren't here on the third Friday of September, I can tell you that. So our dependency on the exemptions, the hold harmless and the declining enrollment exemption in 21-22 went up significantly to about $3 million for each. We've had those 2 big years of enrollment loss, but now we're projecting a slowing. And again, that 1.16% is an average, so it might be 2% one year, it might be 0.25% the next. But we start losing those exemptions because, you don't have the big drops. And between that and no multiplier, no increase in the multiplier per pupil in the revenue limit and the loss of kids, we're looking at a total revenue limit of $126 million, which is about $3.4 million less than we have for the current year. That's the biggest drop I've seen, proportionately, I've seen since 2011, when Act 10 was put in place. So that came fast. We knew it was coming, but I didn't think it'd drop off this quickly. And then I think for 23, 24, and I'm even saying we're going to get $150 more per kid, which is kind of roughly the average of what we've gotten over the years. I think you're in for another $2.5 million drop in revenue limit authority. So this is our budget actually shrinking. This isn't standard, especially Washington math, where they say, well, the increase isn't as big as we expected. That's not this case. Our budget is truly reducing. But we think after that, it will be somewhat stable, as in flat, not not growing. It grows a little one year and then drops back, but around that $125 million threshold. So this is a big mover on the revenue side. The revenue limit represents about 80% of our operational budget, and we're losing $3.4 million from that. And then I don't have a graph for the other one, but the other issue that's out there on the expense side that represents a significant part of our budget is, Patrick actually mentioned at a workshop, is CPI in the role, the Consumer Price Index, what that role it has in our negotiations with our represented group. And then we kind of shadow our other groups behind that settlement historically. And I'm talking about the expense side, if we do what we've done in the past. CPI's averaged about 2.3% over the last half dozen years. We're projecting out in the numbers I'm seeing, CPI could come in at 4.5%, 5%. That's a huge shift in total cost. I don't have a plan, I don't have a recommendation what we do with that number. But you have the revenue limit dropping, expenditures growing, so our budget variance that we normally talk about, the structural deficit, I think we're at least 2 times that, if not 3 times that, for a potential deficit for 22, 23. So we are busy working. We've made great progress in coming up with a plan, but it brings together a lot of different items and a lot of things that the board will have to consider. In the past, we've just presented our budget balancing plan, but there's some agenda items on there I think they'll need direct board consideration. We plan to unveil that in January. We have a tentatively scheduled workshop, right? But again, I think we have a good start. Not that any of those discussions are easy, don't take it the wrong way, but so that's the plan, but the revenue limit and the CPI were the big things because they're moving in direct opposite of directions, fiscal directions from one another. So I don't know if you have any questions related to this, or I sent out a voiceover video too that kind of walks you through the revenue limit thing a little more clearly, so you can actually look at the screen as I go through it. But so certainly different than what we had thought we'd see, 18 months ago or whatever.
So what's the jump in the hold harmless? From 836 to 2.9?
It was
What is that jump?
pretty much generated from the COVID impact on our enrollment. And when you have a big jump,
Yeah.
that's when those hold harmlesses really kick in.
Gotcha.
Now for 22, 23, just looking at that same line item in the middle of the page, if anyone's following along, it drops to 2 million because I'm slowing the rate of decrease to 1.16%.
Okay. Gotcha.
And we had some bigger enrollment drops in a couple of years than again, it's not always nice and even at 1.16%. But that was the biggest jump. So now we're weaning off of the exemptions. In the long run, you want to be off those exemptions.
Right.
It's a painful process to get, and we were almost there. You
Yeah.
can tell by the 800,000 number
Yes.
in both areas.
Yep.
And then everything just kind of got mixed up a little bit, so.
And what's the other line item?
I think other on this thing, you can have, sometimes they do membership or enrollment
Oh, okay,
audits,
yeah.
or there's some tweaking that they do at DPI based on the reports they get all year, so they'll come back the following year in the revenue limit and kind of make you whole.
Whole again, okay.
Like this year, that 135,000 was for some late open enrollment.
Oh, okay.
Reconciliations
Oh, okay.
at the end of the year.
All right, gotcha. And what's the transfer of service?
Usually it falls within special ed, where
It does, okay.
we get a high-cost student that transfers to our school district from another one. You can apply for a transfer of service, a transfer of those costs.
okay.
And then the home district, I guess, would have a negative transfer of service.
Right, okay.
So it's a net zero statewide, but we don't do, and the rules, I think, have tightened up. That used to be kind of open to greater interpretation, but now they've tightened the rules up pretty tight for us, so.
Okay. Any other questions? No. Mr. Coleman?
More of a comment. I've appreciated how this administration for many years has worked real hard to balance our budget each and every year. And it's been a big effort, more of a behind-the-scenes effort of our administration, where it used to be very public and the board voting on all sorts of things many years ago. And so the process that you've taken on, that you take on each and every year, I think we've truly appreciated all the hard work that goes into each and every year. And we're just at a point where that structural deficit needs to be addressed in ways that may have a little larger impact on things. So we will work hard together as a board and administration to figure things out. That process will, as we get together with the workshop, we'll have a lot more detail on that. But there just comes a point in time where you can't just do that in what I'm going to call the more traditional manner that we've taken over the last number of years, which has been truly appreciated. We'll see where we go. We'll figure it out. We have to. We're required to balance the budget. And we'll see what kinds of ideas we generate and work on together, so.
All righty. Excellent. Next up is our ESSER presentation.
Yeah, part of ESSER 3 is the requirement to share your plan for just ESSER 3 funds, but my report tonight, I'm talking about ESSER 1, 2, and 3.
Right.
ESSER 1's already expended. That was our initial response to COVID and all that. So, so this is just the first take. It's version 1.0 for a reason. This is the ideas that we're knocking around. So we're going to be presenting this at some of Dr. Siebert's community groups, whether it's staff or parents, et cetera, to let them know what at least we're thinking now. But this is a living document, and the final say obviously comes down to the board approving a plan. But we also are developing, and actually this slide deck will go on a web page we will have for ESSER, so the community can go look at what we're talking about. And there's an email address we've created just for ESSER for any feedback that people might want to send our way. So I'll just walk you through what we have for information. I'll apologize up front. There's a lot of alpha in these slides. It's hard to bring in a lot of pictures when you're talking ESSER, so I'm pretty much going to be reading to you, unfortunately. So just to review the funding sources and timelines, because there's 3 major pieces of legislation that generate the ESSER funds, and then kind of look at what our plan is and what our needs are going to be over the next couple of years. We did call for a small slice of ESSER to be used in the current year's budget, but if you remember, we set aside the other ESSER dollars to really talk about 22, 23, and 23, 24. Thank you. Again, our goal is to provide opportunities for members of our school communities to, provide some feedback on our ESSER plan. This is only a requirement in ESSER 3, as I mentioned, but I'm going to share everything, because to me it's all one bundle of information. As I mentioned just a second ago, the final decisions for this plan lie with the Board of Education. The board has not seen this until tonight and has not acted on any portion of this proposal. And if you add up all the numbers as of today, not all of the funding we've received through ESSER are assigned. I think there's some that you should hold on to, because the needs of our school community a year from now might be different than today. I don't think we should tie ourselves to a plan based on today and today's conditions and today's challenges fully. And I think we can make maybe some better decisions and more timely decisions if we hold back some of the dollars. Again, it's our plan. There's an end game. every ESSER has an end date that you have to use the funds by, but how we get there is strictly up to us. This is a living document. If COVID's caught us anything, as I was just kind of mentioning, circumstances change week to week or month to month. And it might take us a few years to finalize the plan, and then the ESSER expenditures won't occur until fiscal year 22, 23, and maybe even a little of 2024. So this is a lengthy conversation. We have reporting requirements to share, I think, with them every 6 months. So we'll have this as a fairly regular agenda item on this committee's agenda, just to keep the community up to date on what we're talking about. So here are the three, we call them the ESSERs, but everyone has a different acronym of federal legislation. We started with CARES, and CARES, or ESSER 1, we received $1.2 million, and those funds have been completely expended. We did have to, the private schools have a share of that. I think there might be some dollars left, about 39,000, but it's not really our business. That's for them to expend and then us to report. ESSER 2, we received $7.1 million, and ESSER 3, $10.7 million. ESSER 3 has well, first of all, they have this reporting requirement or this share of information requirement, but they also have a 20% learning recovery requirement spelled out, which is about $2.5 million, if I remember the numbers right. So that's the background. And then each one has a performance period. ESSER 1, we've already gotten to that point of fully expending it, so that's not important. ESSER 2, we need to fully expend the dollars by September 30th of 23, and then ESSER 3, we have till September 30th of 2024 to fully expend those funds. As I mentioned before, ESSER 1, or the CARES Act, that was our initial response. We added staff, tracers, all of our mitigation efforts were fully funded through that. So that went quickly as we were just trying to prepare for that next fall's conversation, or next fall's school year start. As we review the ESSER dollars, please keep in mind that our district budget's running side by side with this. We'll talk about them separately, but they're combined. And some things, as I mentioned in the next bullet, I'd like my office to have the flexibility. Really what this report is saying is, because of ESSER, we can do these things, but my office will code and assign costs to either the operational budget or ESSER, whichever way gives us the most advantageous outcome, because there's prevailing wage, there's other factors, and that's, we have to have those discussions and map all this out. So a few areas of focus. Again, this isn't a detailed plan right now because, again, the board hasn't seen it yet, so I didn't feel the need to go into line item detail. And some of it, quite honestly, is we have placeholders in there for budgets at this point. Student instruction, services, and outreach provided $4.3 million for student materials, instruction, health services, and family outreach. Again, these funds would be used to enhance learning and mental health services for students. The overall needs of students continue to be identified along with will continue to be identified along with the plan to address them. We also had some other slight increases because of COVID in the flow-through grant, the homeless children and youth funding under ARPA, which is ESSER 3, that will also enhance that. But then as I was building this slide deck, I thought we should talk about what we've done even pre-COVID to deal with some of the challenges that we are facing and are more severe now. In terms of mental health services, a few years back, 3 or 4, Joe, we worked on a plan where we brought 7 additional psychs and 2 additional counselors by reallocating resources in Joe's department and to provide more full-time staff in this arena to all of our schools. And that has, whenever these events happen, people always take that snapshot of, well, this is who you've always been. Joe was on this long before COVID, and we've made those changes, so I thought it was important to highlight that. I don't know if you want to add.
Oh, just exactly that. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we're doing now is a continuation of what we did prior to COVID.
And then on the instructional side, for the current year's budget, we created and had discussions about these positions prior. 6 FTE of instructional support positions to help classroom staff. And we also allocated $739,000 of fund balance this year for new classroom resource materials. So a little history on what we've done in the district. The next one is preparedness and education, technology, and infrastructure. Part of this ties into the last one, which is a lot of HVAC work. But a lot of it is our ability to respond to situations and be prepared for whatever comes down the road. So we're looking at $2.5 million for school, fire alarm, PA, clock system, and technology infrastructure, both in the classroom and system-wide. These improvements will allow for better preparedness for the range of situations our school community may face in the future, COVID and non-COVID. Most importantly, it will provide students and staff with a safer and more flexible work and learning environment. And then prior to the health emergency, I think we're all aware that we had put a lot of money into infrastructure. We put a lot of money into iPads and the one-to-one technology. In terms of switching our instructional model to virtual, this wasn't why we created eAchieve, but we had a virtual platform already in place. So we had done a lot of work. Again, no one could have planned for what we've been through the last 2 years. But there's nothing wrong with saying that we were prepared. And then part of our infrastructure, I think it's important, a lot of people don't know, that we continue to partner with the city and county of Waukesha with our fiber network in total. And that's been the case, I believe, since the start of the fiber network. So a little background information.
Not getting into too much detail, but I remember when we had purchased our IP phone system, there were a number of features that we did not take advantage of at first, mainly from a cost perspective. But a lot of those things, and some of those things we did take advantage of, but a number of those things I thought were safety related, and we could have expand that system. Is that some of the pieces that we're taking a look at of taking advantage of, or are we taking an integrated approach, I guess, overall with some of the technologies that we have?
I'd have to defer to Steve, but I can tell you we've, just in the training has had us do, he's expanded what the phone system is doing for us. Replacing a clock system in a building, it's not the old clock with 2 hands on it anymore. Now it's got a digital display and it's got all these other functionalities of safety and security. In a minute, we're going to talk about the HVAC. So we're taking a real integrated approach that if we're in a building and you're working above the lower tile and you're in there, it's our time to go in there and take advantage of those types of advances in technology that are out there. But in terms of the detail on the phone system, maybe we can have Steve provide an update in the Friday update or something, and he could talk about what we're getting out of the phone system if you'd be interested
That
in
would be fine. That would be fine. Appreciate that.
And then the last one, as I mentioned, we've talked a lot about HVAC systems and building systems last summer leading into the beginning of the school year, and tied to COVID mainly, but we were also at the point where we wanted to have a district-wide study to see where are we with our equipment. And there's a lot of needs, a lot of buildings out there, a lot of older buildings. Depending on the situation, sometimes you're applauded for keeping that old stuff running, and then in other situations, people look at you and say, well, why haven't you done anything? So it's just the way of the world. So we do think that's an important improvement, not only for COVID, but for other health issues. that are out there. We do think that if we fully expend the ESSER dollars and we don't touch on this, we're still sitting with HVAC equipment that's twice its expected life expectancy of service. So we took that and ran with it because I think it meets a lot of, or marks a lot of boxes in terms of safety, a better work environment for staff and students, a better filtration level, all those things. And it takes a major deferred maintenance item and reduces it significantly from our future budgets or budget conversations. So one thing that we would have to work on is we've identified the air handling units that, based on age or performance, that we'd have to address. But how far do these funds get us? Do we enter into air conditioning? Do we enter into the, if you're in that building, do you swap out all the controls because you're in there and everything's, when we presented at the workshop, I talked about vertical and horizontal scope of work. Is it number of units or number of topics you want to cover tied to that unit? So we haven't gotten that far. This is one that we would like the board to at least give us some nod to. Again, it's not a must, but just something to keep in mind. There's a lot of planning that goes into this, but the lead time on some of this equipment, I'm hearing 24 weeks. I'm hearing huge numbers that you never had to deal with before. So all of that said, these improvements will allow us to better hit that standard level of filtration in more of our schools and all the locations within. Not everywhere, I can never say everywhere, to get to MERV 13 filtration and a better standard of air exchange rates. This represents a major reinvestment in our facilities and will pay for health and operational benefits for years to come. In preparation of the 21-22 school year, we commissioned a complete study of our HVAC systems in the school, and we've Bring in Due has been here a couple times to the engineering firm to report out on that. And we've identified some major air handling units that need to be scheduled for replacement. We are in the process of cleaning out, we used the remaining dollars from the referendum. We are in the process of cleaning out our duct systems at the school sites and upgrading where possible up to the MERV 13 filtration. And then Horning, Butler, and Les Paul had their systems completely upgraded with their renovation work, so they're running on MERV 13 already. So we have been tackling this, and I believe as part of the referendum work, it was like $10 million of what we spent, if I remember. I reported it out. So we've put a lot into it, but it's a big cost item. There's a lot of units out there. So those are the three areas that we would look to address. So this is how it breaks out. We've left just over 11% of the ESSER funds, the remaining ESSER funds is unassigned at this point. And we can even do this fiscal year by fiscal year. We don't have to buy into all of this all in one swing if we don't want to. I think there's some areas where you probably can do that. But I thought showing you the breakout of what we're looking at would be helpful. Plus it was the one slide that has a visual, so thought I'd mix it up. So some procedural things that also come with ESSER 3 is we need to submit a safe return to in-person instruction and continuity of service report. I know that we're already in face-to-face and we have done a pretty good job of providing a safe return to schools. But there's little requirements like that we will be having to do. And if you're wondering, well, Darren, we already know we're doing this. So we're just marking some boxes and they want to know what we've done. So that's certainly fair as well. We have our transition plan out there, which guides our decision-making chain and how that leads back to the board in most cases. I know Dr. Siebert's been given some leeway in the past. Last year when him and Dr. Cook were closing classrooms here and there. But overall, our major decision-making processes on the website, because they ask you, we'll actually have to send them the links to these things. to show that we're doing that. And then, one of the other things is be prepared for continuity of service, and I can tell you we're more experienced this year. 2 years into COVID, we're pretty good at that, so we think we're in a good place in terms of that as well. So this is the email address for people who want to provide feedback. This will be on the website. It's not very original, but we will be checking it.
Is it case sensitive?
It is not case sensitive, no.
Okay.
So again, we'll be reporting this out. I don't know if, the board members will they have the slide deck in board docs, so I don't know if we need to do anything Wednesday night, but I'll probably present this again maybe at our workshop in January, just to mark another group that we talked to. So if there's any questions of what we've shared so far, I know it's very high level, but if there's any ideas or thoughts, you can also email us as well.
Yeah, going back to the slide on the HVAC systems, I know right now we have a number of system controls, software if you wish, some's hardware and software combinations, right? And we have multiple kinds of systems in place right now, like, I don't even know how many different kinds. Do you have a sense of how many different types of controls are out there, and where I'm going
I think 3.
Okay, 3.
That are major, and there might be some small areas that are different, but.
And from your description, were we trying to drive that down to one common one, or is that not possible to get to in this dollar amount?
It wouldn't get us all the way there, I don't think. Not with replacing the units, the actual air handlers itself. It would get us a long ways there.
So just a piece of information that maybe at the workshop we could have is how close do we get to that? What does that accomplish? Because the end goal is to have one system that we can control as centrally as possible, one location.
Yeah. Yeah, there's at least 3, because we have, I think, 5 different types of heating.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I know it was complex, and we're building buildings at different times, right, with different levels of technology, and we just have the ability now to coordinate that much better in a centralized manner, as long as you have the right equipment and software in place. Easier said than done, but the reason why we have what we have is things were built at different times, and we didn't have the ability in the past to really bring that all together. So just if we could have some sort of perspective of how close we would come, and
That's a good question.
what would maybe be left to get us there, that would be helpful.
Okay. You bet. Oh,
For a motion to adjourn to executive session, Mr. Como?
I move to adjourn to executive session pursuant to Wisconsin statute 19.85, parent 1, parent E, for deliberating and negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specific public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. Specifically, we'll be looking at Oakdale Tax Keys, WAKC 1360198, WAKC 13777002002, and WAKC 1377003.
Is there a second? Mr. Dietz, there'll be a roll call vote.
Mr. Como?
Aye?
Mr. Dietz? Mr. McCaffrey?
Aye.
Como.